Well, I'm Bob Harriman, and that's Brandon Jones, and you're listening to the Global Dispatch Radio Network. Hello, my friend. How are you doing today?
Oh, I'm great. It's great to be able to doing this again.
Yeah, man, and it's been an incredibly busy week in Washington, outside of Washington, and let's go ahead and start with what is arguably the biggest story of the week, and that happened Monday night, and that was the nomination of Judge Brett Cavanaugh. What's your thoughts on that?
Well, I mean, obviously, I think that it was probably one of the safer picks for President Trump. I think what was really telling, and this was leaked out obviously before the actual official name was even dropped, with ABC kind of calling it controversial before, on Twitter before it was even announced, and then you had press releases from the Women's March, we didn't even have a name on the press release yet, and I think it just showed that there was going to be incredible outrage from the left, and it is probably just a little bit, it should be a little bit disturbing for folks to see how this reaction has gone so extreme.
Yeah, but and there's absolutely nothing Trump could have done not to get this reaction. I mean, he could have picked Merrick Garland, and they would have been unhappy.
I think that I know there's been a lot of jokes about that, especially in some conservative circles. Like everybody would have thought, well, what's going on with the guy? What's the secret if he's actually Trump picking this guy? And I think it really just shows. We saw this with the Supreme Court rulings and their edicts over the last few weeks. They have no regard for the Constitution. They don't care at all, and there is no sort of sense of appreciation of what the judicial branch is and what they're supposed to actually be doing. And it just shows that this is about activism. This is about their belief that the court will validate their agenda, what they believe is right, what they see as an inconvenience of trying to go through Congress and trying to get the votes. They believe we need to use these judges for this. And to me, it is very, very frightening to see how far they're willing to push that pendulum to put political pressure on the executive branch to give them what they want.
Yeah, and like you were saying, I heard one talk show that they had call-ins, and one of the people calling in says, the question was, what do you think a justice should do? And of course, most people would say, stick to the Constitution, be a strict constructionist, strict to the text. And one individual said, to do the will of the people. Well, I'm sorry, no, that's not a judge's role. That is the legislature's role, but that is not the judge's role.
Yeah, we're living in an age where I think there's more and more ignorance, right? I think we posted about campus reform. They had a great video they leaked where they went around New York University over the weekend before the nomination had been announced, and they just asked these students, well, what do you think of Trump's nomination? And they were already calling this faceless individual that didn't actually exist yet racist and extremist. They don't know anything about the Constitution. They're not plugged into what's really going on, how things actually work, yet they're unwilling to admit that they don't know something. They might have a blind spot. I mean, the survey that we published about the millennial generation, which was polled a couple years ago, and Democrats were actually very outraged over this, and that is their ignorance of Roe v. Wade. The left wanted to use Roe v. Wade as some sort of stick that conservatives are allegedly just trying to overturn Roe v. Wade. Millennials don't even know what Roe v. Wade is. They don't know when it was enacted. I mean, a big chunk of people were thinking this happened right after the Revolutionary War. People don't understand states' rights, federal rights. It really is just a very telling time that I have to give credit to President Trump. He has brought out a derangement in their reaction to every single thing he does, and it really is showing who all these players are.
Yeah, and concerning Roe v. Wade, that's definitely a topic we need to touch on in the future because is it constitutional? Is it not? There's a lot of really good questions to go along with that. How about Brett Cavanaugh? Have you done any research? Looked at any of the cases? What are your thoughts on him as a judge?
Well, I looked at all of the candidates as you know, the tenor kind of changed over the last 10 days or so in particular, and I think Cavanaugh is kind of a copy, or at least similar in his writings to Judge Roberts. They write very narrow, right? So, like, this is kind of what we saw with the Masterpiece Cake ruling and religious freedom. It wasn't so much that they were saying that you're not allowed to force a business owner to do anything against their freedom of conscience. It was something about the way the government had treated them unfairly. So they write very narrowly, and I think that is going to be interesting to see if that is going to be the case in the future. Instead of striking down other cases that could possibly be on the books, they would write something very, very specific. And I think that's what we've seen out of Roberts a couple times. I think we saw that with the Obamacare ruling. I think Kavanaugh had ruled in a very similar fashion. That's what Roberts was kind of basing his line of thinking on. I think that the court now stays right of Robert. Roberts is now the new middle, if that's fair, until Kavanaugh kind of proves otherwise. Mm-hmm. I don't think anything in his track record points to him being like left of Roberts, but I would say that they're kind of a toss of the coin between the two. I posted today, I think what was really fascinating, Hugh Hewitt, who I don't really enjoy much other than on legal topics like this one, he really broke down the Rule of Four. And the Rule of Four is a very fascinating concept for people who don't know much about the Supreme Court, and that is it takes four of the justices to agree to hear cases. And I think what Kavanaugh does represent is a more secure place for Roberts to move certain cases forward that they may not have wanted to. And the example that Hewitt used was Rex Lee, Mike Lee's father, when he was Chief Justice, and how he really kind of didn't move certain cases forward, knowing that the court was leaning against the Constitution. The court was leaning in a direction that was against kind of a fair evaluation of the Constitution. And I think that could be something we see. I listed amongst the things I think that this might open the door to. We might actually see some cases being heard on gun rights, gun ownership. We might see some different regulations and things like that. Pulling back, the executive branch using the EPA and tax code as kind of a weapon, as we saw during the Obama administration. And then, of course, I think we will definitely see religious freedom cases and some sort of abortion cases in the future. So Kavanaugh will be tested, I believe, within the next session to kind of see where he'll land on many of these, important verdicts.
Yeah. My skimming of his record showed to me he appears pretty devoted, to the legal text and constitutional principles. Pretty good defender of liberty. Really good on rights of speech, I thought. Religious conscience, I thought. And he seems very, very good on the excesses of a regulatory state, basically. However, I do have a concern, and I didn't hear you mention any concerns, but I did have a concern because I stumbled across several cases, and it looks like he just has like this natural default to presidential power. And there was one case that was, I thought, pretty disturbing. I'm not sure if you're familiar with it. It's called the Clayman case, and that was Clayman versus I think it was Verizon and President Obama and a bunch of others. And it's where the D.C. Circuit ruled against a challenge to the metadata collection program of the NSA. Uh-huh. And Kavanaugh went out of his way to file concurrence in which he said that even if the collection program was a search under the Constitution, he believed it could be done without a warrant because it fell within an exception. What was that exception? That the president had ordered the program to combat terrorism. Yeah, I had a little problem with that, and I would imagine you might too.
Oh no, I do, and I kind of want to kind of break down positives and negatives. That definitely, those cases need to be heard, and we really need to try to get some cases to them to really start quantifying what are these companies, what is the government, and what is the NSA. All of these different things with cybersecurity and cybercrime allowed to do, and how do we, kind of get our heads around how we're going to define that going forward. I would say I didn't really dive into that case very much, but I will say that from what I know of his writing on that case, I didn't read it all for myself. I only read like some blurbs from it. I was very concerned that was going to be his leaning, especially during the Obama administration, where there seemed to be sort of a very haphazard approach to what the phone companies and what the big tech were doing. So now that we have more proof of violations, we know now with Google and Facebook that there's been blatantly open doors to all of our information and things of that nature, that some of these things have to come into question. I don't know if there are any cases pending. I searched for some quickly and didn't find one. So I would say that maybe we're a session or two away from having a crucial case or a crucial decision, but I could be wrong.
Yeah. And, and there's a lot of speculation about how conservative, how middle, maybe even how left he may be. But, we never know how this is really going to turn out, how these people are going to start ruling, because, right, we've been fooled before.
Oh, absolutely, right?
Yeah.
Most presidents have a 50-50 chance of getting this right. We have incredible track records. And I will say, this is another reason why I thought President Trump should go very hyper-conservative, because the tendency is the conservative picks go left. We don't really have a track record of left-leaning presidents, having a candidate that goes right. They don't really ever tend to miss with their picks. I got to be honest, other than Elena Kagan, on only a couple of rulings has she gone towards the center. Most of the time she's far left as well, but she's the only one that I could think of and that I could find really that has actually voted twice, with the other side. So, yeah, we'll see. We can touch on one other concern. That would be some of the abortion things. I am concerned that they won't take up cases in this arena because the left has made such a mockery of what Roe v. Wade is and what it stands for. And I'm just worried that they won't take the case up to try to avoid that for a session or two. And we have two in particular, Iowa's heartbeat bill, and then there are several others. But anything that puts any sort of limitation, Mississippi's 15-week ban, Texas has some regulatory restrictions on when doctors have to have emergency access, things that seem common sense to medical care and health care, but under the guise of abortion, they're being struck down as being undue burdens for women. I really want these cases to go forward so we can at least know and put to rest, because we just have too many unborn babies being killed, and we have too many left-leaning people who are just tying up the systems with undue legislation and lawsuits. So I really would like to see some of these cases move forward, and I say that knowing that even if they don't go my way, I just want this to be behind us.
Right. Well, let's go ahead and close out this section with a little bit about the hysterics, and without going into Cory Booker or Kamala Harris, right? I thought the most intriguing thing I heard over this past week was a Yale professor who was a professor of Cavanaugh, and his name escapes me right now. He was on a talk show, and apparently he wrote an op-ed for one of the papers, basically saying that Cavanaugh was a great pick and this and that. And this guy who was pro-gay marriage, pro this, pro that, totally left, but knew Cavanaugh's integrity and his record and all that, stood up for him, and he got lambasted. You pick the media author, media writer, they all just attacked him like he was the worst thing since 1944. I mean, it was just really horrible. So even a guy that's on their side cannot get away with having a reasonable opinion about something,
Well, I mean, that's what we've seen, right? We've seen Alan Dershowitz really complaining about the left in this way, right? Like, if I don't toe this certain line, I'm kicked out of the club. I'm not invited to the parties. I mean, he literally is being attacked now for saying that, and then it's like, well, now he's trying to backpedal his way into the parties. And I think, like I said, I was just really shocked, and I know you love to talk about, tweets, and I don't want to get too far ahead of things that you want to talk about, but my favorite tweet of the week, which was just mortifyingly, shockingly bad and scary, was Elizabeth Warren.
Yeah. She
tweets right afterwards, it's time for a fight, and it's with a video of the mob on Capitol Hill, on the Supreme Court staff. And it's like, is that where we are? We're just going to rally the mob, and obviously she knows that is her only tactic. But they don't have the numbers to stop this. I mean, I guess in theory we could see 2 or 3 Republicans moving away, but there's so many Democrats having to run in the midterms that I can't imagine that a few of them that are in Trump territory or states where Trump won big are not going to vote with this guy. It'll be devastating for them if they do that.
Yeah.
So that mob mentality that you're saying and how it turns on anyone, just showing like, look, Kavanaugh's not that bad. I mean, look at the story today. Was it Washington Post, right? This guy used a credit card to buy some national tickets, and he paid off his debt within a year, and somehow it was spun as being some sort of grand conspiracy. It was very strange and a weird nature of the press to try to just manufacture something. And I really just can't relate. I don't even understand spending that kind of energy to do this sort of thing.
Yeah, well, going back to the mob mentality, I mean, that's really the hallmark of socialism, is this violent mob mentality that has been, since Mussolini, even before that. I mean, that's the way it's been. And so we shouldn't be surprised by that, and that they're going to return to those tactics over and over again. All right, Brandon, what other important story did you find this week that we should look at?
Well, I would say the week is kind of split in two, right? So the first part of the week would be some carryover before and around the Supreme Court pick that involved this mob mentality. We're coming off the heels of I don't know how many stories now of people approaching, harassing, throwing water on a Trump cabinet member. I mean, it's just so many crazy things. The kid that had his, MAGA hat snatched off his head at a Whataburger and all of that. And then it sort of twists on a dime with the Supreme Court stuff. Now it's all about the NATO stuff. And I don't know what your thoughts are on this. It's just a weird dichotomy where they're trying to say Trump is pro-Russia by criticizing the Germans for partnering with Russia financially on. How do we parse that and reconcile that in our minds that he's basically attacking them for working with the Russians, but somehow that's pro-Russia?
Yeah, well, I thought that was quite interesting too, because Trump pointed out rightfully that, Germany gets 85-90% of their energy from Russia. So yeah, you are under their thumb. There's no question. That's if the United States was getting 95% of our energy from Canada, we would be under their thumb too. So Trump's absolutely right about that. And the fact that, what's her name? Angela Merkel could dispute that in any way is just absolute foolishness. I mean, yes, that's the way it is. You cannot have that much of your economy under somebody else's, boot. You just can't. So
and also to understand that that's all interrelated, right? So what they're bringing in through Germany is also feeding and assisting the other EU countries, and some of them are completely reliant on that as well. So de facto, you have other countries that are really struggling, and I don't know the numbers, but obviously you have Greece and Portugal that are barely holding their economy together, that if we eliminate this Russian factor feeding the EU, what does it do for those countries and their economies?
Yeah. Yeah, you're right. And then Merkel was also saying, well, we're good friends with Russia and all that. They're never going to turn their back on us, and that kind of something to that effect. And it's like, okay, if that's the case, why do we have NATO then? If Russia's not a threat, why do we have NATO? Why do we have 30,000, military troops in Germany? Pull them out. Put them over to Poland, where they are actually afraid of the Russians. So
yeah, I agree, and I think that Trump does pose that. I don't know that he would pull out of NATO, but I could see him putting his foot on the gas and say, well, you're not getting 4% towards your budget. You're going to get, 2%. Yeah, or we'll match what you do or something like that, right? We'll start to see some of those games being played.
Yeah, Trump sends a lot of mixed messages with this kind of stuff, and you really can't tell where he's actually coming from, but pulling out of NATO is not something he's going to do. He's just not. No. Now, granted, he did pull out of the UN Human Rights Council, which I thought was a fantastic move.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, but
that was a glorious moment for Nikki Haley. I think her stock rose to anyone who believes that we should support Israel, our only ally in the Middle East. And it gave her such a great sounding board to thrash the hypocrisy of the Middle East leadership.
Yeah. All right. Well, Brandon, they say all new trends in this country seem to start in California. And if
yeah.
and if that's the case, I got a doozy, right? So the city of Stockton is going to become the first in the country to participate in a test of the universal basic income. And Stockton's going to give about 100 residents $500 a month for 18 months, no strings attached. And this is going to start happening next year. And this is really getting a lot of traction and support from a lot of the people in the Silicon Valley. Elon Musk and Richard Branson, Zuckerberg. And a lot of the financial backing for this project is from Chris Hughes. Are you familiar with him? He's part of the Facebook.
Yeah, co-founder of Facebook. Yeah. That's universal income is actually his main point of activism right now.
Oh yeah. I mean, he actually has a whole organization surrounded with this topic, and he said, which I could not stand, it is such a fundamental idea behind America that if you work hard, you can get ahead, and you certainly don't live in poverty. But that isn't true today, he said, and it hasn't been true in this country for decades. What kind of message is that, and how untrue is that? How untrue is that? If you work hard, you have every possible chance to get ahead. I mean, that's just a horrible way to look at things.
Yeah, I don't. Well, it's just delusional, right? So, I mean, first off, obviously he doesn't understand how poverty-stricken most of the world was and how much that has changed over the last, 30 years, in particular, since the Cold War. And then, moreover, he doesn't understand that the poorest in America, with our televisions and access to cell phones and cars and basic infrastructure, how much better our lives are than most of the globe. And you know what's really fascinating? I'm actually happy to see the experiment go forward, because I don't know about you, but let's just assume you're not. Is it 100 people getting $500? So I got the numbers right, correct?
That's right. Uh-huh.
So what do you do if you're the number 101? You don't get the money. What's the first thing you're going to do? You're going to cry about why you didn't get your money. So how long until this starts to break down with the mob to go, well, how come it didn't go to me? How come it didn't go to me? And, oh, you're being too judgmental or racist or prejudiced for who you selected out of your 100 people. I mean, how we do this, it doesn't even mathematically make sense. Like, I'd understood the Hughes and the Zuckerberg arguments when they said, well, we're going to give every single citizen $500 or something, because then there's no way you could argue differently. But now we're going to say, well, no, we're going to selectively decide these are the poor people that need this little charitable welfare check. It doesn't make any sense. I mean, like, it doesn't. First of all, it's also like $500. And I don't know about you, and I know there are people that are really, really poor. $500 is a ton of money, I guess. But even at minimum wage, it's not that many hours of work based on the minimum wage in California. So it is a very strange experiment and a strange way for it to be rolled out.
Yeah, and I would say that, it's an experiment that's been done before, too, because I think it was Finland who started it in 2017, and they're going to drop it because it just wasn't sustainable. So, I mean, we have the experiment already existing in essentially a democratic socialist country, and they said, nay, this isn't working. Let me just give you some numbers. How this would look nationally. You were talking about, if more people got it. And I'm not sure where I got these numbers from, Cato maybe, but it says if the government provided just $12,000 for every individual in the U.S., or enough to bring them to the non-elderly federal poverty line, the cost of universal basic income in the U.S. would be nearly $4.4 trillion, or more than the whole federal budget. Yeah, so
that's more than we spend every year.
Right.
That's more than we may have ever spent. I don't know that we've ever gone over 4.2 trillion. Yeah. That is a crazy number.
And then you have to also look at, what about, we've already seen what welfare's done. What's this going to do? What's the negative behavioral effect from something like this? We saw that with welfare. This isn't going to continue.
Well, and obviously there's a cost benefit that Finland is figuring out, right? You're just outputting a bunch of cash, and there's no benefit coming back in. And in theory, they're trying to say that somehow this will enable these individuals to they'll take the cash and they will put it all back into the system. Well, if they're putting all of it back in the system, then you're just giving money, you're just giving people free stuff. Oh, yeah. You're not actually doing anything that's going to create a betterment. You're not lifting someone out of poverty. You're not enabling someone to become self-sustainable so they don't need the $500. They're just going to get $500, spend $500, and then wait for the next month to get $500 and spend $500.
Yeah.
So it's just a silly, weird twist on the socialist model. And as I said, I'm intrigued to watch it because I want to see it fail. And I'll see how it plays out. I don't know how mathematically it won't fail. And I don't know how long it will mathematically go before, if I'm citizen number 101 and 102, I don't file a lawsuit or something.
Yeah. Well, clearly the system is bad for both the poor people and us taxpayers.
Absolutely.
All right, Brendan, what about stories that are under the radar? You got anything?
I think, it's been a strange week. And I think one of the things for me has been that, when we have all the protests and the anti-Trump stuff, we also have sort of this crazy move further and further left that Dave Rubin talks about. He's being a classical liberal, and they left the liberals behind. And one of the areas that we see this in is obviously anything that has to do with social justice, and especially when it comes to schools and academia. And two schools made news this last week. Virginia had a school district that basically redefined, quote, biological sex. They removed that, so your child is not, you don't have to mark biological sex. You now have to put, quote, sex assigned at birth.
Boy.
So this really feeds right into gender fluidity and all the new political correctness that transgenderism has brought, because, you were born this way. That was what we heard during the gay marriage and the rise of homosexuality and tolerance across America so rapidly over the last 10 years. But now with the transgender movement, we're seeing this gender fluidity where you're not allowed to tell your kid or treat the kid or know what they really are. And we saw it with this school. And then another school, which is another religious freedom incident, is we had a situation where Freedom from Religion sued the school, and then it came out that what had happened was the Gideons were passing out free Bibles. And the coding in the district had changed over the last couple of years. So what used to be a public property in the street become the school district. And since it was the school district's property now, they're not allowed to sell Bibles. So we literally have, and it's literally in the language of their memo, is that they literally will call the police on that individual if they do this again. Well, call the police on handing out free Bibles. That's crazy.
Yeah. Go back to your first story and from the Virginia one. How are the parents reacting to this?
I don't think that we've had enough time yet to see that get organized. This is literally so new with that. But Virginia has always been a hotbed for this. They've had several lawsuits and really huge battles over privacy with transgenderism in bathrooms, locker rooms, field trips. And the last case got dismissed where the student no longer had standing because they had graduated from the high school. So that case didn't go anywhere, but that one will come up again. Virginia's a hotbed for this gender fluid, transgender acceptance program, and it's in total conflict with the gay community. By the way, I don't know if you saw over the weekend, there was a gay pride rally in London, and we had transgender people laying in the street, probably about 24 to 30 of them, because it's not tolerant of them. I mean, literally, it's like they're eating their own with the oppressed Olympics, right? It's like, who's the bigger victim here? So it's just crazy land, and it goes under the radar screen. Like I said, one of the media is just obsessed with, all anti-Trump all the time. These stories don't get any attention.
Yeah, well, let me give you a more positive story, and that's out of the Pacific island of Guam. And they're not performing abortions on Guam anymore. And it's not because abortion's illegal there. Actually, quite the contrary. They have pretty liberal abortion laws there. It's because the last abortion doctor on the island retired, and no other physicians on the island want to continue with that practice. So right now there are 0 doctors on Guam to perform abortions. So it's been eliminated. Very positive story there. And just to give you a little fact about abortion laws in Guam, there are no restrictions at all for a woman to have an abortion if she is less than 13 weeks pregnant. But if the preborn baby has a birth defect or disability, or the pregnancy is the result of rape or incest, it is then legal to have an abortion up through 26 weeks. So anyway, hat tip to the physicians in Guam, and they're actually abiding by, do no harm.
Yeah, that's an incredible twist on what is not the norm in many parts of the world. So it's a fascinating situation to watch.
Yeah. You did your Twitter tweet. I'm going to go ahead and do one too. And for the audience that is not aware of a person named Avery Edison, you need to check out her Twitter page. But it all kind of got started with Elon Musk, and he was tweeting about, the situation in Thailand. Of course, Elon Musk had something to do with that, with some equipment or something he donated. And somebody responded to him saying, I wonder how often Elon would rather be a physics engineer or a lead technical designer instead of having to carry the label of billionaire. And Musk goes ahead and replies to his tweet, ironically, the billionaire label, when used by media, is almost always meant to devalue and denigrate the subject. And basically he goes, I'm still doing the same thing. I'm paraphrasing. It's just the scale that has changed. Enter Avery Edison. And here's the tweet. Billionaire should be a slur, as it is a effing shameful thing to be. Vast wealth is immoral, and capitalism is a cancer on society. And she tweets some more garbage, but that you get the hint there. But the interesting thing is, if you go to Avery Edison's Twitter page, here's what it says: comedian, you can support me at patreon.com or buy naked pictures of me for $10 at averyedison.com. So
wow,
there you go.
Capitalism only works. It only works for them, not for Elon Musk. So
yeah,
I gotcha.
Just absolutely hilarious. It's just the
Sell naked photos for $10 or support me through Patreon, but that evil capitalism.
Yep.
Wow.
All right. Let's go ahead and close out the show with some movie reviews, and you're going to start with Ant-Man and the Wasp.
Yeah, have you seen Ant-Man and the Wasp yet?
No, I haven't.
All right, so for me, I must be in the minority because most people are raving about Ant-Man and the Wasp. Some people are really, really enamored with the film. I found Ant-Man and the Wasp to be a very bland and let down film. So my biggest problem is the film takes place and it runs sort of parallel to the events in Avengers Infinity War. And if you haven't seen Avengers Infinity War, you might not want to listen to the rest of my talk, because it's important to know that, that Thanos and the events of the war and, who survives and doesn't survive is pretty impactful on most fans of, going forward. Like everyone, my son said it best, but he said the most thing I'm excited about to see is how this film fits in with Avengers Infinity War. Well, sorry to tell you, it doesn't have much of anything to do with Avengers Infinity War. It runs sort of parallel. We find Scott Lang, Ant-Man, under house arrest. He's been under house arrest for 2 years after the events of Civil War, whenever, the accords were signed and basically banning these people. If they don't want to register with the government to be a superhero, you're not allowed to be one. So not only is he under house, he's got a plea deal with the government because he wants to be with his kid. So he's with the daughter, and he's days away from fulfilling this responsibility and being free from house arrest. Meanwhile, Hank Pym and his daughter Hope, who were in the first film, are still working behind the scenes to try to figure out how to search for the mom. She's in the quantum realm. They're convinced that she's there. And the film kind of centers around this link between her and the quantum realm and Scott, who, because he went to the quantum realm in the first film, now is somehow linked to where she is. Her name is Janet, and she's the original Wasp, right? So Hope is the new Wasp. She's the original Wasp. So the film kind of gets muddled into the identity crisis. So it's called Ant-Man and the Wasp, but the film is trying to only set the Wasp up to be a great superhero. They're trying to set her up to be part of the Avengers at some point in the future. Scott is just totally incompetent. He barely uses the suit properly. At one point, the suit's not working properly. There are gags that are centered around him not going to the right size. Like if he thinks he's going to go big, he ends up going too small, or vice versa. And there's all these little gags. I don't really feel like most of the humor worked for me, but some people do. I think that the supporting characters, Michael Peña's character in particular, Lewis, goes on another one of his crazy rants where he's telling a story, and they're showing shots of the other characters, but it's his voice narrating, and that was pretty clever and funny. But the hardest part was at the end of the day, after Infinity War, we just don't care as much about all this. Like, it just seems like a weird time. Maybe it's just too soon to that film. Like, I feel like it should have come out in November. Maybe I'd feel a little bit differently about it. I will tell you there are 2 after-credit scenes, and one is important, and the one at the very end after the credits is just almost like a waste. It's so bad and wasteful of your time, you almost wish you hadn't waited that long. So overall, I kind of got it in the middle. It's about a 2.5-star film. Yeah. You got to see it if you're into the Marvel movies. You got to be able to keep up with what's going on, that kind of thing. And it's fun. There's some good moments. So, if you're really into that kind of stuff, add a star. It's kind of like a 3-star, maybe a 3.5 stars. Kind of a midland film. Nothing spectacular or great.
All right. So what else is in the pop culture scene?
There were a couple other movies that are coming out. They pushed up the limited release of a great film. It's called Leave No Trace. It's a PG film. It's clean. It deals with Ben Foster stars as a dad. His name is Will, and he's suffering from a PTSD and some sort of issues. And he and his daughter, her name is Tom, and the actress's name is Thomasin McKenzie. And they live in the woods. They live in, it's set around Portland, Oregon. They live in a park, like a national park. They're like homeless people would. So it really sets up some very interesting social questions and concerns about homelessness and PTSD. And I don't mean this from like a disturbing way or anything like that. It's a very sweet film with how they interact with each other. It's very interesting what judgment society has of them when they're found. Like we would feel the same way. Like if we just found 2 people living in a park, we would make these presumptive judgments without knowing their story. And I think it calls us out on that. It does a really good job of it. The film proceeds where he can't assimilate. He's really stuck where he cannot get back into society and culture properly. He really needs to be in therapy. But she's not. This is all she's known, but now that she gets a dose of what society and culture really is, she's kind of wanting to kind of pull away from him a little bit. So the film really deals with her kind of coming to age with that, and then dealing with this struggle with Will. It is a great, great film. It's clean. It's challenging, and it's dark, so because it's a drama, and we're not dealing with, like, really pleasant topics. But it's a limited release. Check your theaters. It's called Leave No Trace. I give it 4.5 stars. It is a weird timing for a film like this. It's almost like one of these sort of like Oscar-esque kind of films where it's more like a heavy topic. But for it to come out in the middle of like, summertime with all the blockbusters, it's kind of weird. So it will not be in theaters very long. But if you miss it, come out on, other streaming services, catch it because it was really good. The other film that's really big, the biggest film this week, is going to be Skyscraper. Skyscraper is the latest Dwayne Johnson, The Rock, blow-it-up action film, and I wish I could tell you anything good about this film. It is so bad. Its next spot really needs to be in the hands of like Mystery Science Theater. It is just an awful, awful film. I don't even know how to tell you how bad it is. It's really not a way to even frame. I really could write an article. Instead of writing a review, I should write the 20 awful moments of this film. The poor Rock, he's not the problem. He's actually just who he is. He is this sort of FBI hostage negotiator, former military guy. And there's an explosion early in the film where he makes a judgment call that was wrong. And then we fast forward to the current time where he's living with just part of his leg, and he's trying to get the security deal to this incredible technological marvel, this giant, the tallest skyscraper in the world with this amazing tech. And basically then it tries to become Die Hard, where the terrorists and the people are attacking this skyscraper, capturing his family inside. He's outside,
And then, of course, if you've seen the poster, you've seen him leaping from a crane onto the skyscraper, defying gravity and laws of physics. And I wish I could tell you that was the only scene. If you read my review, you'll see the first line is there's one line where The Rock goes, "This is stupid," as he's talking to himself about climbing on the ledge of this giant building. And I have to tell you, that was the most honest moment in the film. It was just so stupid. The producer of this film is the same that's on many of these other really bad idea films that star The Rock, like Baywatch. It was a remake called Baywatch. One called San Andreas, which is like an earthquake film. And so this producer just he's making Jerry Bruckheimer and them look like brilliant people. It's really what's sad, is because this movie is just that bad. So I gave it 1 star. I'm probably being kind, because I don't know that it even deserves a full star, but The Rock kind of deserves a star, because he's not the problem with this film.
But this is still...
So save your money.
But it's still a film that's probably rolling in cash, though, right?
Well, we won't know until this weekend. My anticipation is it will probably make in the neighborhood of, $30 million. I guess it depends on the reviews. Like, some people may like stuff like this. I couldn't do it. It was just so bad. And there are so many inane moments and just horrible ideas and concepts. It was just bad. But yeah, I mean, it could make $30 to $50 million, and because the summer, right? So people need something to do. They've seen all these other films. We're a week away from, I believe we next week or the week after we get Mission Impossible and some of the kinds of things. So people have seen Ant-Man, or they've seen some of these other films, and they'll go see Skyscraper just because it's there. So it may make a fair amount of money, but it doesn't have, I believe, any potential to make a ton of money and warrant, as there's a joke in the film about Skyscraper 2, because at the end of the film, the one guy's, there's talk about the buildings, like, and he says, "I'll rebuild." And I'm like, oh my gosh, the idea of Skyscraper 2 is just horrifying. So, don't save your money, folks, in my opinion. Go see Ant-Man again if you need to. Go see Avengers again, for the love of Pete. Definitely don't waste your time on this. So.
There you go. All right. Well, don't see Skyscraper. That's what the pop culture guru has to say. Any final thoughts, Brandon?
Well, I just want to say that, I have a great opportunity for anybody who wants to find out more. I'll be speaking at my church on Wednesday to the teens or young adults on evolution, science, and God, just kind of bridging the gap. And I think the one thing for me that I find in all of these kind of these meetings and get-togethers, and I wanted your thoughts on this too, with how many people just have this misconception. If we listen to Richard Dawkins and Sam Harris, right, because we can be Christians, we can't be scientists, or we're somehow our credentials or our capabilities should be called into questions and things like that. So part of what I spend most of my time doing or answering questions to is really trying to validate that parallel belief. And, I know you're my brother in the Lord, so how do you kind of reconcile that as well in your life and your career?
Well, it's absolutely difficult. When you are in the science field, you're going to find that most people around you find Christianity to be nothing more than a fable. I've been questioned by my own relatives. How can you be this science guy but believe that? Well, it's not hard. All you have to do is look outside, and you can see the wonders of God and science everywhere. It's interwoven, and I see nothing that would make me think anything different. Everything that is science, whether it be the chemical formulations or the biology of a human being, that's all God, and it's to me it's clear cut. So I don't worry about it. I don't worry about what people think, but I do realize I am in the minority.
Yeah, it is. It's definitely an area that we probably don't talk about, and there are not a lot of great advocates and conversationalists that are really trying to explain that. And one of the things I stand on too is, I got to be honest, Bob, you and I've worked in science pretty much our whole career, and that is evolution, how old the Earth is, the creation story, all these kinds of things have no bearing in our day-to-day operations of how we work and do our job. Never have. Mm-hmm. And I think it's a disgusting proposition to try to say, I know Ben Carson faced some heat, right, because he believes in, kind of a literal young Earth creation, yet he's this amazing surgeon, and I think it's a disgusting attack on him. And I would think I would rather have the
amazing surgeon that believes in a young Earth and God than the guy that believes in evolution and finished last at the local med school.
Yeah.
So that's just my opinion.
Yeah, it is kind of sad because they do try to tarnish this guy's incredible history and ability of, pediatric neuroscience or whatever his specialty is. And because of personal beliefs, I may think they're correct, but they are still his personal beliefs. And that how on earth does that diminish his abilities as a surgeon and a scientist? It doesn't. So yeah, I just think it's in life you have to pick your battles, and I don't usually force this issue, but if it comes at me, I'll defend what I believe. But I mean, there's just so many things that you got to bring out the sword and fight off these people. You can't be in battle all the time. So, that's kind of how I look at it.
Well, it'll definitely be a topic that we can definitely talk about more sometime, but I think it was worthy of trying to mention here. So, yeah. But thanks. That's good.
Thanks, man. I'm glad we had a chance to talk today, and I want to thank you, the audience, for listening. And for more news and views, I ask you to visit theglobaldispatch.com. That's theglobaldispatch.com.